Welcome to episode 40 of Motivating Mondays, a weekly podcast and YouTube series dedicated to help Canadian job developers and other employer engagement professionals develop the tools, resources, expertise, and network to excel in achieving sustainable employment outcomes for their clients or students. My name is Christian St. Cyr, National Director of the Canadian Job Development Network, and today we're going to take a closer look at new employment standards which are taking effect across Canada. This legislation has been identified by provinces and territories as a critical tool in building the best local workforce possible. We'll examine these new changes and how they can support you in your job development role. Now, this past summer, I was advising a young person who was debating whether to take a job where they would be an extra staff member and the employer would decide on a day-by-day basis whether their services were required or not. Now, this person was debating whether the job and the 2-hour commute that would take to get there was worth it if they should continue their job search, or should they continue their job search and find something that was a little more secure and closer to home. Now, they've been told that by the employer, if they show up for work and they're not needed, that the employer would just send them home and only pay them the 2 hours required under employment standards legislation. Now, this took place in British Columbia, and most employers are under the impression that they are only required to pay for 2 hours if they send people home early, and this is not completely correct. The actual employment standards stipulate that an employee who is scheduled for 8 hours or less must be paid the minimum of 2 hours, even if the employee works less than 2 hours, or even if they don't work at all. But if the worker stops for a reason beyond the employer's control, the employee must be paid their minimum daily pay or the actual time worked, whichever is longer. Also, the Act clarifies that an employee who is scheduled for more than 8 hours must be paid the minimum of 4 hours if the employee works less than 4 hours. And yet, if you ask most small employers in British Columbia, they'll say that they're only really responsible for 2 hours and they'll leave it at that. Of course, those are the employers who are even aware that they have this responsibility and don't just send people home who aren't needed without paying them at all. One of the things that I struggled most with as a job developer is how many employers have only a passing understanding of the employment laws that are expected of them. I remember one career development leader discussing this, and she said that most small business owners get into a field such as maybe a catering company or opening an auto shop or working as a construction tradesperson where they're employing other laborers, and they simply don't have the training or the skills necessary in recruiting and training and supervising a workforce. Now, this said, I don't think this serves us in the job development field by hitting employers over the head about where they're falling short in employment standards, but I certainly think that we can be a resource to employers that they turn to if they're looking for more information. Over the past few years, provinces and territories across the country, as well as the federal government, have enacted new labor legislation to protect workers. Whether governments are conservative or liberal or New Democratic, there seems to be a prevailing understanding that this is not only popular to enact more worker-friendly legislation, but it's also a necessity in growing their future workforce. Now, according to the Canadian Occupational Projection System, less than 50% of our future workforce growth is going to be coming from young people who are entering the workforce for the first time. Barely 25 to 35% of our workforce will need to come from immigrants, and that means that the remaining 15 to 25% will need to come from engaging people who have checked out of the workforce, they're not participating, or encouraging people to move to our province from other provinces or territories. Now, each province and territory is angling to be the most attractive place for people to live, whether for young people or immigrants or for those who are coming from other parts of Canada. In recent years, we've seen a huge surge in the minimum wage across the country, when in previous years, the minimum wage would remain unchanged for years at a time. In 2026, we've already seen major announcements, some of which have actually already taken effect. On January 1st, Ontario, for example, enacted new pay transparency legislation requiring employers to include salary ranges or actual salaries on posted positions. Ontario's new rules stipulate the average annual salary range must not exceed $50,000 unless the job pays more than $200,000 or where the top end of the salary exceeds $200,000. Pay transparency laws aren't just unique to Canada. They're getting traction across North America with similar rules also in other places in Canada, such as BC or Prince Edward Island and other parts of the United States. This type of legislation is extremely popular. Data released in November by Indeed found that 83% of respondents in provinces like BC and Ontario and Quebec view these changes positively. British Columbia actually brought in wage transparency several years ago and has applied it to increasingly smaller employers each year. On November 1st, 2026, organizations with 50 or more employees will be required to include pay ranges in their job postings and post their annual pay transparency reports, showing what the difference is between what men are making and what women are making in the workplace. Other components to Ontario's new employment legislation, which took effect on January 1st, include a requirement that employers disclose whether artificial intelligence is being used to sort or track or evaluate job candidates. Now, Quebec doesn't have legislation specifically addressing AI that's used during job screenings, but the province's Law 25, which was adopted in 2021, states that employers must disclose when decisions are being made used by automated processes, which includes AI. BC also has increased unpaid job protection leave for serious injury or illness that they did in late 2025, setting the stage for what is considered to be a significant compliance consideration for organizations in the coming year. The new maximum of 27 weeks per year brings the province in line with federal standards as well as those of other provinces, according to the officials in the province. Albertan workers can now take up to 27 weeks of leave per calendar year instead of 16 as of this month, matching federal standards for long-term illness and injury leave. Saskatchewan, their new rule bars employers for asking for a sick note unless the employee has been away due to illness or injury for 5 consecutive working days. The province is also extending its long-term sick leave to 27 days. Now, BC introduced a similar sick note policy in November for the first 2 instances when an employee is absent for 5 consecutive days or fewer in a calendar year. Manitoba is expected to introduce legislation in the spring of this year to axe the sick note altogether for most minor illnesses. Minimum wages across the country are now hovering around $17, a significant increase from levels that were set prior to the pandemic. Nova Scotia is implementing a minimum wage boost in 2 stages this year, a 25% increase to $16.75 in April, and another 25-cent bump to $17 per hour in October. Prince Edward Island is also increasing its minimum wage to $17 an hour in April. The provinces and the territories aren't the only jurisdictions trying to stay on top of employment standards. Canada's federal employment standards, which is the Canada Labour Code, are on interprovincial and international transportation, telecommunications, banking, radio, TV broadcasting, federal crown corporations like Canada Post, port services, pipelines, uranium mining, and some First Nations activities. They are expected to bring in a minimum wage in April that will bring the federal minimum wage up to $18.10 per hour. Other provinces that index minimum wage increases due to inflation or index minimum wage increases to inflation are also expected to implement higher pay this year as well. For federally run organizations or for federally regulated organizations, the federal government has banned the use of replacement workers and changes to maintenance agreements and they did so in late 2025. This amendment provides up to 16 weeks of unpaid leave to carry out responsibilities related to the placement of a child into their adoption or surrogacy. It also ensures that eligible workers can access employment insurance benefits for adoptive parents without fear of losing their job. So, what can we take away from all of these rapid changes in employment standards? Well, as new types of legislations take effect in one province, they're likely to spread to other provinces, just as new minimum wages are spreading across the country. We are well into Canada's ongoing skills shortage, and it's not expected to end regardless of whether the country's economy gets better or worse. That isn't much comfort to job seekers who you might be working with who are struggling to find employment in this economy, but it is certainly encouragement for people to develop new in-demand skills. Provinces and territories are competing for workers and residents. Employment standards legislation is a significant factor in providing employers with the workforce that they need to expand or relocate. It's been my experience that most provinces provide incredible tools, fact sheets, videos, explanations, employment standards, all online, but it's exceedingly hard to get someone on the phone and certainly have someone explain these standards in person. Lawyers, on the other hand, immerse themselves in the legal precedents of what displaced workers are owed, but care little for the meager offerings legislation provides. They would rather negotiate in court or appear in court for a big payout rather than compensate someone for what they should have been paid in the first place. I believe we have an opportunity here to establish ourselves and maybe your organization as a local expert on employment standards. When a local media outlet or employer group or just an individual employer is looking for insights into employment standards, they can look to you to share this information. I would encourage you to share your base of knowledge specifically. I would encourage you to base your knowledge specifically on the tools and resources that the government provides. There is a legal aspect here, and we want to ensure we are providing the exact wording, documents, and explanations that your province or territory is standing behind. As I said, I don't believe we're going to win over a lot of employers by wagging our finger and telling them everything they're doing is wrong. This certainly isn't going to impress employers who are quick to skirt the rules in the first place. But for employers who are eager to be in compliance, struggling to understand the rules or run their business, this type of subject matter expertise can go far to building our trust and our reputation within the communities. Employers who want to build their business with integrity and trust are going to be the employers who are most likely to support and encourage vulnerable workers who are trying to build their skill set in this rapidly changing labor market. There has been so much interest in our Labor Market 101 training modules that are taking place this March over 5 days. The career development sector has grown so much in the past year with hundreds of new career development professionals. This is an excellent introduction to important LMI divided up into 5 different occupations. So we have separate training modules for each occupation. So we're talking about how labor market information should be used and impacts resource room advisors, or employment case managers, or facilitators, or job developers, or even managers and supervisors. Up until this Thursday, January 15th, everyone who registers is going to benefit from a 35% discount on their registration. Now, we have 2 series planned, one for British Columbia and another one for Ontario professionals. But if you want to know more information, for British Columbia, go to labormarketonline.com/LMI 101. And for Ontario, go to OntarioLaborMarketOnline.org/LMI 101. Thank you so much for joining us. Please click the like or subscribe button in your platform. Search for Motivating Mondays wherever you download podcasts. We'd also love it if you could subscribe to our YouTube channel or rate or review this podcast. Now, we do these sessions live and for free every Monday morning on Microsoft Teams with job developers from across Canada. It'd be so great if you could join us. Just go to jobdevelopment.org to learn more. If you have any questions, please send me an email. My email address is cstcyr@labormarketsolutions.ca. Thank you so much for your time and have an amazing week.